Hi, guys. How are you doing? Hey, I didn't think I was going to come out and ever talk about this again. I thought we were just pretty much going to roll through this COVID thing and it would be about done. Yet there's a lot of things that are going on right now. And I know a lot of people in my clinic have been asking me questions on this. So let me tell you everything that I know, and some of this stuff I'll go back to some of the articles. I meant to try and pull all the research on it, but that was going to take so long. So sorry, guys. I didn't pull the research, but you can go out onto the web and you can find the research on these things. So first of all, let's talk about what's happening. Right now, it's July 2022. And we have a new variant out there. It's the BA4 and BA5, and it's actually the BA5 of this that's causing the biggest issues. So that strain, I think it was first identified. I don't know if I can't remember when it was first identified, but that is a strain that's coming in right now, and it was here for the July 4th. That strain is different than every other strain that came before us. So quick history. Let's start with the first COVID, Delta, and Omicron. So those three infections went into the lungs. And then from Omicron, we went to BA1 and BA2. So let me give you more background on that. So the first COVID was 2020, and that was in the lungs. And then Delta came, and that was 2021, and that went into the lungs. And at the end of 2021, we had Omicron. And then at the beginning of 2022, Omicron went into the lungs too. And then at the beginning of 2022, we had BA1 and BA2. And BA1 and BA2, it didn't go in the lungs. It stayed in the bronchs. So if we look at the lungs, so the lungs, they have these bronchioles, and these bronchs go and allow air into the lungs. So the lung is the organ, the bronchs let you into the organ. So when the BA1 and BA2 stayed in the bronchs, I was like, yeah, finally this thing is becoming less toxic. And I can tell you in clinic, that was like the easiest one to treat. It was almost like treating the flus from 2011. So it was real quick with the herbs, and it was real easy to get out of people's systems. The ones before it, like the very first COVID, was really hard to treat. That one was really difficult. It was like 5 or 6 different formulas, and they were really aggressive formulas. And then Delta was pretty much the same. You could use the same formulas that I used for the first wave. Omicron was a little bit different, and it kind of mixed on what kind of formulas you could use to get that out. But the formulas in total were really effective with it, and they were really effective with the BA1 and the BA2. Okay, so now we have BA4 and BA5, and what's different about this? Well, the BA4 and the BA5, it's going back into the lungs. So it's not only just in the bronchs, but it's going into the lungs again. And how annoying is that? So to give you some ideas of what that means. So if we have the flus and the colds are usually in our sinuses and in our bronchs. Bronchitis is in our bronchs. And then pneumonia goes into the lungs. So that gives you a difference on how severe disease is when it goes into the lungs or it stays in the bronchs or the sinuses. So we had BA1, BA2. It looked like it was finally going to get less toxic. It was staying in the bronchs, no longer going into the lungs. And now the BA4 and BA5 is going back into the lungs. So that's going to be a little bit more dangerous for you and me out there. Okay, so let's talk about immunity, because everybody has been talking about the hope of herd immunity. And so what is their herd immunity? And that's been the other really interesting fact on this one. The BA4, the BA5, you do not get prior immunity. So if you got this strain in the wild, if you got any of the COVID strains in the wild, it doesn't matter. It doesn't give you any immunity. And what about the vaccines? Well, they're seeing the same thing with the vaccines. And I think we're just kind of learning that these vaccines that we have right now are not effective against these new strains. So when BA1 and BA2 came out, they were starting to see a lot of immunity escape, is what they call it, where the vaccines weren't working. And prior prior infections weren't giving immunity. But what they thought was, you just need another booster. And so they were, doling out new boosters. But what they found is that that's not true. You didn't need another booster. It didn't really care about your vaccine. And BA4, BA5, it doesn't seem to care at all about your vaccine. So the vaccines are not helping, and the concept of herd immunity doesn't seem to be out there. And so what this means for BA4 and BA5 is we all have an equal opportunity to catch this. And so what am I seeing in clinic? So with the BA1 and the BA2, what I saw was about 30% of my clients were infected. And, one of the things that was really tough is that, kids have to go back to school, right? Nobody wants to stay at home. We are so over that. So kids were going back to school. The infection rates were super high in schools. And so parents with kids in school, they were all getting infected. And so that was BA1, BA2. And again, about 30% of my clients had infections on this. So now we're at BA4, BA5, and this was here for the July 4th weekend. And we're thinking that we are going to start seeing a huge uptick in infections around now. And I am seeing that. I am seeing that the infections are starting to step up again. So people that had been sick just last month with the BA2 are getting the BA5. And so it does seem to be an equal opportunity infector. And that goes to talk to that you might, if you're compromised, you might want to take extra precautions. And even if you're not compromised, you might want to take extra precautions. And why is that? Well, there is a study out there, and that study came out of the UK, 650,000 people. And you know what? I didn't even go over some of the articles that I had on this, but that's okay. Again, hop out onto the web. You'll be able to find these articles, and I'll try and direct you to where the articles are. But there's a study out of the UK, 650,000 people. They're trying to identify what's going on with COVID. They're finding that about 30% of the infections are resulting in long haulers. And they're also finding that, I forget what they said, the rate of reinfection was. It's been going up. And that, I've been watching that too. I've been kind of curious, is the rate of reinfection going to go up? And why I've been curious about that is there was been a research study that from a really noted virologist that was published in January of 2020. And he looked at that virus and he said, based on the virus and its characteristics, this is what I think is going to happen. And so I read that and I thought, that's not fun. And it turns out that everything that he said is coming true. But there was one part of his research report that I've been waiting for, because this was going to take time. And he said that we were going to get reinfected, and our immune systems were going to get weaker and weaker. And so I've been waiting to see if that's going to be true. And I think we're starting to see that we do have the information that our immune systems are getting weaker with each infection of COVID. So each time that you get infected with COVID, your immune system gets weaker. And how I started to quantify it was I was watching the kids, because I was like, oh, the first COVID, that was, horrible. That was really deadly. And how many kids got infected with that? None. So it was like zero. And that was like amazing that these kids had such resistant immune systems that they could fight off this toxic waste dump like it was nothing. And that was really positive. And then Delta, that was really pretty toxic too. And maybe about 5% of the hospitalizations were kids. And then we got to Omicron, which was supposed to be so much less than the original variant, right? It was supposed to be such a smaller deal than the original COVID. And so I was expecting pretty much no kids to get infected, and pretty much 20% of the hospitalizations were kids. So between the original to Omicron, the number of kids being hospitalized really stepped up. And yet how dangerous that disease was stepping down. And so that was pretty disturbing for me. Then we come into BA1 and BA2, which I'm like super happy about because it's staying in the bronchi and it's no longer going into the lungs. And I thought, finally, this thing is going to start mellowing out. And our hospitalization started upticking. This one wasn't really as bad. It was super easy to treat with herbs in clinic. But there was still a lot of people who got sick, and it wasn't like it was a mild sick. Some of these people were flat on their back still for 3 to 8 weeks. And that's just looking at what happened with my clients in clinic. You know, some of my clients treating COVID with herbs it's really interesting because people just don't think you can do that. And yet that's what, out of everything that I've seen, that seems to be the most effective treatment so far. So I'm still hanging with herbs. I'm just going to do that. And so some of these people got sick for quite some time and were flat on their back. And now we have the BA4 and BA5. And they're saying that not only does it stay in the bronchs, but it also goes now back. It's going back into the lungs. They don't think it's going to be as severe as Omicron. So it's not as big a deal as Omicron, but it is going back into the lungs. And that's a problem. And when we talk about reinfections, well, I'm already seeing people who are sick with this BA2 variant just a couple weeks ago. They're catching the BA5 variant and they're getting really sick again. So you can get reinfected, and apparently you can get reinfected pretty quick. We know now that for the BA4, the BA5, prior immunity is not going to give you anything. There's no such thing as herd immunity with this variant. And the other thing that we know is vaccines are not working on this variant. Well, when we went, so let's talk a little bit about vaccines, which was our great hope for these variants, right? So let's talk a little bit about vaccines. When we went to the mRNA vaccines with Moderna and Pfizer, those were super effective against the original variant and Delta, those really deadly variants. They were really effective, and they're a little bit effective against Omicron, and then they started getting less effective, and now they're not effective. But what we thought with those mRNA vaccines is that we had found the new holy grail, right? Because we could reformulate these and get them out in a year, which seems more than adequate. Because if we look at the flus, right, the flus last for about 10 years, and you might get a mutation in there like we did in 2013, and I think we had a mutation in 2009. But, you know, if we took a year, by the next year, we'd be able to get out a vaccine that actually addressed that mutation. So we were pretty confident that, you know, a year was all the faster we had to get. And right now they're starting to talk about, hey, a year is too long for these. And this virus is really toxic and it's really a problem. So what does that mean? So if we looked at the original COVID variant pretty much kept its ground and stayed the same for about a year. And then we had Delta. And Delta pretty much came in, and that was 2021. Delta came in and it held its ground for about 8 months. And then Omicron came in and held its ground for about 6 months. And then after Omicron in 2022, we have the BA1 and the BA2, which was here in February. And by May, the BA4 and the BA5 was taking over. So February, March, April, May. So 4 months now, from 6 months to 4 months. We had shrunk our timelines. And now they're starting to talk about Centaurus, which is a new strain, and that's 2 months. They've just seen the very first infections of Centaurus this month, I think. And so if you look at that, the first one was a year, then 8 months, then 6 months, then 4 months, and now we're down to 2 months. That is too short a time frame, even for our new amazing mRNA vaccines. And so they're talking that we are not going to be able to stay ahead of these with vaccines, and that we have to think about something else. And so now we're going to start talking about your immune system, because I think that's going to be our ticket, is, making sure that our immune system stays strong. And the other thing that I think is, you probably are going to want to think about wearing masks again. Okay, so we have the BA4, we have the BA5 variant, which is here right now. And let's talk about the transmissibility of these. Let me add in here. Let me make sure. Yeah, I think it's this report here. I am going to, let's see here. I think let's see here, media source. Okay. Greater transmissibility. Okay, yeah, the R naught. So there's a factor in these that's called the R naught factor, which is its transmissibility. And shoot. Okay, it's not gonna, I'm sorry, I didn't set this up before before I started doing this stream. So I'm going to tell you where you can find this. This is in Fortune magazine, and it's on BA5 COVID, the transmissibility of this, what's going on with the transmissibility of the BA5. So the R naught factor is, it tells you how transmissible something is. And I believe you want it at 1, and then its transmissibility is, it's not increasing, it's staying where it's at. And if it's less than 1, then that means that it's going away, and it's going to be gone pretty soon, because if one person's infected, less than 1, it's going to transmit to less than 1 person. Well, the original COVID, that had a R naught value, which talks about it's how transmissible it is of 3.3. So that, being that it was greater than 1, meant that it was a growing infection. So the infection was getting worse. And if we look at Omicron had an R naught factor of 9.5. So that one was really pretty transmissible. And we saw that, boy, just overnight, poof, the infections and the hospitalizations just shot out of the water. And then we have the BA5. Now, let me talk about the flu here. I think if we can put something on here, the 1918 flu had an R naught of only 2. Mumps has an R naught of 12, and measles has an R naught of 18. So measles is our most infectious agent. So the flus they didn't have really big R naught factors. So they didn't have really big transmissibility factors. BA1 was 13.3, an R naught of 13.3. So that was even more transmissible than Omicron. That's really interesting. I mean, I did see it blow up over here where I live. It just blew up, but the hospitalizations just ticked up just a little bit. It wasn't a super big deal. Now this BA4, BA5, and you know why the hospitalizations just ticked up a little bit, right? Because this just went into the bronchies. It didn't go into the lungs. And if you know about the flus pretty much in the bronchies, the sinuses, and not in the lungs. It's when we get to pneumonia that we get to have stuff in the lungs. So So even though this last variant that just happened February through May, the BA1, the BA2, even though that was a lot more transmissible, 13.3, so a lot more transmissible than Omicron, it didn't cause more hospitalizations. So you see why we were all going, this is so cool. It's finally starting to become less dangerous to us. And now that's turning around, right, with the BA4, BA5, because it's starting to go back into the lungs again. And its R naught factor is 18.6. Do you believe that? It is more virulent than measles. So this has become the new heavy hitter of all our infections ever, is this new COVID strain, BA5, that we currently have here. Now, so I'm not sure what that means. I can tell you in clinic, I'm just starting to hear of people getting sick with this BA5. And being that you don't get prior immunity, I'm seeing people that were sick a month ago that just got over the BA2, they're sick again. And so you can get sick again with this. And it sounds like it's pretty bad. There's a couple of my clients that I need to call and see, but it sounds pretty bad. And we're starting to see the hospitalizations tick up across the United States. So I'm not quite sure what this means with this BA5, but it's the biggest variant out here. Now the next variant is a Centaurus. And one of the things that they're saying about COVID right now, especially with the Centaurus, and they're saying this one's a new stealth virus, is that its transmissibility, they think its transmissibility has gone up from the BA5. So the BA5, is the new heavy hitter in the world, in the globe. From everything that we've known from our history forward, this has become the new most virulent virus out there. But this Centaurus, they say, is probably more virulent than this. So I don't know. It sounds like they're saying with this one that even being outside now, that is not going to give you a safety, and that you might want to think about wearing masks around people indoors and in crowds outside. And so we're seeing that you're not getting prior immunity. We're seeing that the vaccines no longer work. And so it really becomes up to you to kind of make decisions for yourself and for your family on how you're going to stay safe. Now, do you need to think about staying safe, right? Is this like the flu and I can just get it as many times as I want and I'll be fine? It's not like the flu, apparently. So let's talk about this study out of the UK, 650,000 people they've been tracking to see what this means. What they found, now this 650,000 people, it stops at the BA1, BA2, and they found that 30% of the people are getting long haulers. And what they're starting to find is, what does this mean for people? Now, there's a part of this study that said, how many times have you gotten infected? And you know what? Our initial information, our data collection, it's not very good on, how many times have you gotten infected? Because remember, in 2020, there was no testing in the United States. So I know I got that first COVID. I know almost everybody in my clinic got that first COVID, and there was no testing. We didn't really know about it, but we were so sick. I've never been that sick in my life. And then, so that information was never captured. So you can see that this testing or this research report, it doesn't have full and complete information. So when you listen to this, kind of think that, this may be a little bit underreported. Their statistics might not be completely accurate. So 650,000 people, what are they saying? They're finding about 30% of the people are getting long haulers. And what they're finding also is that each time you get reinfected, that your immune system gets weaker. and your ability to get long haulers increases. So that's a bit worrisome. And what does long haulers mean? It can mean a lot of things. You remember with the original COVID, it was 8 months. It took 8 months for long haulers to show up in most people. All of a sudden, 8 months later, they had all these weird things going on. Another weird thing about long haulers is it impacts the blood. So blood's a really big deal in long haulers, and we're seeing strokes and heart attacks. And you hear about the strokes in the 30 something. So this younger generation is just getting these strokes out of the blue. They seem really healthy. They might have even just had a mild case of COVID, and it impacts your blood flow in a way that at some later date you end up with a stroke or a heart attack. And I ran into my first stroke person 1 degree away from me. So I remember when COVID first came out, and the people that were infected that were 1 degree away from me, it took about 6 months for that 1 degree to start hitting into my circles, 6 to 8 months for me to start interfacing with people who had actually gotten COVID that I knew one-on-one, and not 1 degree away. Not so that I knew somebody and their friend got sick, or their grandmother got sick, or their grandmother passed away from COVID. That's 1 degree away. You know that person, and they know the person that actually was impacted. So when things first happen, it usually happens that the people are like 1 degree away from you. And then as it starts getting more and more common, then it starts hitting into your circles and the people that you know. And if you think there's 6 billion people on the face of the earth, and how many people do you know? You know, like maybe 300 people that you keep up with. The time frames that it takes to get into your circle, that's such a small circle. It seems like it should be forever, but it's like 6 to 8 months. And that's pretty quick, right? 6 billion people, about 300 of them, and it takes how much time to get into your circle? 6 to 8 months. That's pretty amazing. So I can tell you, I just ran into the first person who was 1 degree away from me. And it was one of my clients, their son-in-law had the stroke, and these strokes are pretty severe. They're like strokes that you get when you're in your 80s, where they paralyze one whole side of you. And that's one of the things that they found really, really upsetting about this COVID, is that some of the damage it's doing is really severe. So long haulers, a problem with blood flow. The other problem that they're seeing is that it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it causes mental disease. Now here in the US, the CDC was talking about that, and the CDC has a report up on crossing the blood-brain barrier and causing mental disease. But you know what? They kept their focus only on seniors. Well, this report out of the UK, it didn't just keep its limits to seniors. They're seeing this across the board in people, that it does cross a blood-brain barrier and it can cause mental illness. Remember that 1918 flu that everybody was talking about? Well, one of the things that it did was it caused mental illness in some people, and that mental illness lasted for the rest of their lives. And it's not unusual. They've really wanted to study the impact of these superbugs, these super viruses on people for a long time, because they do permanent damage to your body. And so now it looks like we have the opportunity to do that. So that's why you might want to be aware that reinfections, they're not like the flu. It doesn't mean that you're going to bounce right back. In fact, what it means is that your immune system is usually going to get weaker with each subsequent infection. And they're starting to be able to verify that with data. As more and more people get reinfected, their ability to get long haulers increases. And some of the really serious things that happen with long haulers is going to increase. Okay, so let's see here. So, what does that mean for you, right? Well, your immune system, again, you're going to have to make some decisions for yourself. And one of the things that you might want to think about is wearing a mask in public, especially with the Centaurus. And I know we're all over the mask, but I don't know. Some of my clients that I'm seeing right now that have long haulers, I don't know. I found that treating long haulers has been really effective with herbs. And I found that it's that I've been able to get 80 to 100% of functioning back. Actually, let's say 80 to 95%. There'll be some weird things that still hang around that are not significant. We would usually write that off here in the United States. And so I don't know. Mostly though with herbs, I've found helping people with long haulers, it's been super effective. And I thought that was weird. So everything that I've seen so far for me in clinic is that I found herbs were much more effective than Western medicine, unless you got really sick. And so for people who have gotten really sick and they haven't come in to get treated, they're pretty sick. And I don't know what to say about that. But so there you have it. We're seeing that we're getting vaccines, not so effective. There's no herd immunity. You've got to pretty much take care of yourself and your health and make decisions to keep yourself and your family safe. So I didn't think I'd ever do another one of these COVID broadcasts, but there it is. You know what I'll do is I'll put some of the links in the video description below so that you can go out and read about it yourself and make some decisions for yourself. Okay, and the other thing that you might want to do is, how are you going to keep yourself safe? I have a whole section here on YouTube on clean eating. And then on Facebook, I actually have the Real Health Guru, which is all about clean eating and taking clean eating to that next level where you learn how to use foods like herbs and how to use foods to help repair specific things in your health. So not like nutritionists where you learn how to eat foods to lose weight. This is really about how to eat foods to repair your health and keep yourself healthy. So think about that too, because it's your immune system. Okay, that was a whole lot of information. You guys stay safe, and until next time, I'll catch you on the other side.